As certified life coaches with 45 years combined experience in human resources, Jen Trum and Catherine Fry have both experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, both personally and professionally. What they both know to be true is this: our mental, physical, and emotional health are the essential building blocks in order to thrive and shine in the field of HR. In a first of its kind podcast, we'll be getting real and we'll discuss and share what has contributed to both our success and struggles, with the goal of inspiring women around the globe to stand tall and take the necessary action to both thrive and shine in HR. Here are your hosts, Jen and Catherine.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jen. How are you?
Doing really great on this Monday morning. How are you?
I mean, you know, I love starting Mondays with you and with our entire audience. So I'm doing great. Time of the recording, President's Day weekend. And yeah, I think a lot of people are enjoying a long weekend. But not everybody. Not everybody in HR gets President's Day off.
No, not everybody, myself included. So we were just saying, Jen, are you going to be going to work today? I'm like, yes, I am.
Why, yes, I am.
Those who may not know, I actually am currently also a HR manager for a grocery co-op in Ashland, Oregon. So that is definitely up and running today. And I will be heading to work here in about an hour.
And your community thanks you for keeping the grocery store open so people can eat. I just love that. Just such community service, Jen.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's get into it today. I missed you so much, Catherine. Last week I had so much fun, though, getting to talk about unlearning and what that means. But I would love to hear a little bit about how your time away was. You went to the tropics, right?
Yes. So Brett, my partner, and I do have permission to talk about him. We went to St. John for a friend's wedding, and it was our first vacation in 2 years. And I thought, oh, it's not going to be a problem. I can hop on our podcast. It's not going to be a big deal. We were in the middle of nowhere. It's a national park. We were literally at a place where the nearest restaurant was a ways away. We were away from the nearest town. So I really didn't have connectivity. So it was great. From that respect, it was great. But I missed you. I really missed you. Starting Mondays off with you was really important. So, and with our audience. So I'm happy to be back. And I feel very rejuvenated from vacation all at the same time.
Right on. Well, let's talk about this week. So today we are going to be talking about boundaries, what boundaries are, because I think both you and I can agree that there has definitely been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding when it comes to boundaries. And then we will also talk about what they can be. And how we can be so much more intentional when we understand them more and be able to act from a place of being able to set them with intention. And so with that, let's talk a little bit about what they're not. Catherine, we were talking before getting on today and just having so much fun, but we were saying both of us, I think, can really relate to in our lives not really being super clear for ourselves what exactly a boundary is and what it is. And I think so why don't you share an example you had said?
Well, I mean, I am quite literally flashing back to when I was, many of you can relate to this. I was at work. I was an HR director for an international design and planning firm. And I got a call from somebody I love very, very much. And we had a little contention in our relationship. I stepped outside of the office. I knew this call was very important. And this person said to me, I need to set some healthy boundaries. And I just need some space. I need some space for myself. This person said, I think you need therapy, which is true. I'm a huge fan of therapy, right? And she used the word boundary. And this was 10 years ago. It was the first time I had heard the word boundary. So for me, I attached the definition of boundary meaning you put up a wall against someone. That was my interpretation of boundary. And fast forward to, just a couple of years ago, I was actually at the National SHRM conference down in New Orleans. And there was a female speaker, a women's empowerment speaker. And I'm usually very shy. And I stood up at the end of her presentation. She was talking about boundaries. And I was like, can you give me a definition of boundaries? I don't understand what boundaries are. And to be really honest, she fumbled. She didn't know what boundaries were. So I've been on this mission to really get clarity on what I think boundaries are. And I'll just go ahead and throw it out there. I mean, for me, my definition has evolved from it's a wall to keep people out to it's a wall, but you show people the door of where they can come in and out. But I have a totally new definition in 2024 that I've been working with. And as opposed to boundaries keeping people out, boundaries are to keep people in. How do we work within the boundaries to meet the whys of both individuals, if it's people? So it's just been this really wild progression that I've experienced over the last decade. And, the first 20 years of my HR career, it doesn't matter because the term boundaries didn't even exist in the workplace. So, that was a lot. I'm obviously on some coffee this morning. Jen, I am dying to hear. Jen knows, I love how you articulate things. So I cannot wait to hear what boundaries are and are not for you.
Well, I love that because I definitely can relate to having difficulty really understanding what they even mean, what it even means, because I went for many, many years with this misguided assumption or understanding that boundaries had to do with how I could ultimately control or get people or, get things to be the way that I want them to be, right? It's almost about this manipulation of the external of what I want it to be. And over time, and really within the last couple of years, have I really been able, I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned Simon Sinek, but Simon Sinek has been one of those people that has been truly so inspirational for me to be able to go inward and understand what boundaries truly are. So I said this a little bit ago before we started the podcast, and as I was saying it, I'm like, damn, I should have put this on record, because it's like sometimes you articulate things and then you're like, can I say that again? But for me, what I've really realized over the last few years is boundaries are a true honesty with myself around what it is I really need, what it is that what's really needed within my own life, and being able to be so intentional with how I choose to live my life and how I choose to show up in my life, that it means that I need to create some guardrails. So that for me is what was the game shifter. And I really love what you're talking about like recognizing the other. Let's say it's another individual involved, right? It's really recognizing that other individual, that other thing that we are, needing to perhaps adjust in our lives, and then being very intentional about trying to meet that person where they're at. And that goes into a whole nother level around what boundaries can be. And I think where for all of us, every single one of us, it's like that progression of what it means, I think, is completely normal. So, if anyone out there is at a place where they still get confused with boundaries being about trying to get your husband to do what you want him to do, or get, your coworkers to solve, ultimately the goal is that you want to be able to, create that within your life. But if you're focusing on those external factors and wanting to get those to shift and change, that in itself is what I think we've realized is with a bit misguided. Would you agree?
100% misguided. And I love how you use the word manipulation.
I
trying
know.
to manipulate our husbands with boundaries. And as
Yeah.
I could not relate to that more. And in fact, I'm just going to fully admit this. Even though I've been redefining boundaries, even a couple months ago in the fall of 2023, I still thought a healthy boundary for me was to not, just going to be honest, was to take time for myself and not speak to somebody who had hurt my feelings. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Somebody in my personal life who had really hurt my feelings. And I said, you know what? I just need time for myself. And I thought at that time, with my definition of a boundary being it's for me, it's not for, and it's not against, and it's for me. And I knew I needed to heal and think things through. But what I neglected to do, I put the person on the outside of that boundary. And it further harmed our relationship. So while my definition of boundaries was getting healthier, I still wasn't thinking about everybody involved, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm still working through it. And I'm still experimenting with my new approach to boundaries and just all the research I've been doing. I love that you brought up Simon Sinek. Before we started going live, I was talking about a woman who the Holderness family, she was on that episode. There's so much actual research about boundaries and what they are and what they're not. And when we really dive into it, it's really empowering. And it's not about manipulation and about keeping people out and controlling things. It's almost the antithesis of that, as you were saying. It's about the internal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned the Holderness family. That is, for anyone who's never heard, such a good podcast. It's husband and wife, and they have fun, but they also talk about really, really important things. And so you had said that they recently had an episode on boundaries, right?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
I was down in, I'm trying to think of when it was, and maybe I can put this in like show notes later. I was down working with a client down in Telluride, Colorado, and I was skinning up the mountain listening to the podcast, and my mind was just being blown right and left with this concept of boundaries aren't to keep people out. Boundaries are to keep people in. And when I've experimented and led with that thought, my new approaches have been working. So it's just wild to me. That was a big shift for me personally and professionally.
I think that, in just listening to you, it's like so inspiring because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, the journey's never done.
Nope.
I think, and the more that we learn and understand about it, I think the more it serves everybody. It's not just in service to ourselves, it's in service to all. So it's like, I love that. So what I want to do now is shift to the poll. So each week, for those who are not aware, we do a poll that we put out both in the Women of HR support group on Facebook, and then we also put it out on LinkedIn. This week's poll was, where in your life would you benefit from setting more boundaries? So we gave 4 different responses. And so the 4 responses that we put were prioritizing self-care, overuse of technology, management of personal energy, and time management. So off the top of your head, Catherine, I do have the results here now.
Okay.
Thank you for everyone who participated. So off the top of your head, which one would you say came out on top?
Okay. Out of all 4 of those, I cannot pick one because as you listed them, I was like, yep, and yep. I mean, they all rise to the top for me. I'll speak for myself and I guess for my clients, I think it's about, for me, it would be about like personal energy and what I hear most from my clients who have done a little bit of work and they realize it's really about, as you were saying earlier, it's about me, it's about my energy, it's about within. So I would say something more on the, the personal side, the empowered side of things would be my answer.
Yeah.
What would you have guessed before looking at the results? I'm curious.
Me
Yeah.
5 years ago would have
Yes.
definitely put prioritizing self-care as number one.
Yeah.
And I think that is definitely something that, well, it was number one on the survey. So it like it doesn't surprise me a bit because yeah, so 44 of the percent of the people who did the survey said prioritizing self-care. And
Yeah.
I think that is massive. Like you look around and we see that everywhere. And
Mhm.
so the personal energy one that you had said, that is now my number one. And so why don't we talk about that a little bit
Okay. That's
first?
wild. I love that.
Let's talk about that a little bit first because
Okay.
our personal energy, right? You look at self-care, you look at time management, you look at, all the things around us.
Yes.
We are energy, right? As
Yes.
human
Yes.
beings, we are energetic bodies. And so the more that I've been learning and understanding and researching just how energy works,
Yeah.
as women, right? Like one of the things I think that we really struggle with is the fact that we as women, you can't help it. We run in cycles. We are cyclical and men a little bit too, but we have to like recognize, especially as the science and the data gets more sophisticated and more focusing on
Yes.
women, I think it
Yes.
helps us understand how we function. And when it comes to like when we are, when we are at our best and when we, are not so much at our best. And I think becoming more aware of and being intentional around our natural state, I
Yes.
think is really what's where I've geeked out these last couple of years is really understanding our natural states and being able to tap into that in such a pure way.
Wow.
And by doing that, it's like really paying attention, like really paying attention to what fuels us,
Yes.
what is filling our tank and what is sucking us dry. And you had said something earlier, and it was, really like it had to do with time management, which we'll get to, but like how we invest and how we spend and how we waste.
Yeah.
And time is just one little chip off the energy, off the energy
Absolutely.
hole. And so
Absolutely.
that to me has been like such a massive shift in my life and one that's come with some pretty significant consequences. So, you had
Ah,
talked about, the boundary setting that you've done that really, I think, pushed people away. And I think
yeah.
as we really like learn about ourselves and go through these journeys that we are on, I think part of that does include like becoming aware of what no longer serves us. And
Woo.
that's hard. That's really,
Yes.
really tough because I think you and I can relate so strongly on alcohol and
Yep.
how recognizing how much that no longer served us. And
Yes.
as energetic beings as we are, we can have like so much compassion for ourselves on that need of being able to slow it down in
Yes.
the way that I think alcohol did. And so in terms of like relationships and in terms of like recognizing our own energy and what is important and what really truly matters, that's where boundary setting is both critical and also so difficult. It's so
Yes.
difficult. And so to your point earlier about letting in, I absolutely agree with that. I think the more that we can be intentional with setting boundaries, it is about letting in and growing our hearts,
Uh,
growing, our ability to everything. And so I think that is really how we start creating the container. Oh my gosh, I went all over the place.
I mean, I just want to jump through StreamYard right now, which by the way is how we record this podcast. And I just want to sit with you in person and just have this conversation for the rest of the day. I just want to like eat this up and keep this conversation going. And when I think about management of personal energy, as you were talking, so this is evidence that I was not deeply listening to you, because if we're deeply listening to somebody else, we're not thinking of our own stories. But my mind went wild as you were talking. So I'm going to come fully clean about that. When I think
You're forgiven, by the way, because you are human.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
go on.
I thought about the fact that both you and I are certified life coaches. So we've gone through the training to really understand how to manage our personal energy. And it's a personal journey for every single human. What's going to work for you is not going to work for me, and vice versa necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And I think one thing I heard, and I think to myself all the time, is we're responsible for the energy we put forth into the world. So we're responsible for what we emit. We're responsible for who we surround ourselves with. We're responsible for the fuel we put into our bodies. We're responsible for proper hydration, all of those things that give us literal energy and figurative energy. So, I mean, I could talk about this alone for about 7 days and barely scratch the surface. I guess for me, my personal energy, I think about when I left the 9-to-5 HR world, and my last role in HR as an HR director, my personal values were so misaligned with my bosses and the organization. I'm just a go-getter. I like to get stuff done. I like to move things. And I was working for an organization that was pretty stagnant, and somebody who subscribes to management practices, but not leadership practices. And I'm all about leadership and management. So it was like, I had to figure out if I was going to stay with that organization. And I felt like my energy was really depleted because I was surrounding myself with people who really wanted to see stagnant. And I remember the thought that I kept having was, but I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. I have so much I want to do in this lifetime. I want to help HR practitioners around the world. I want to help elevate women all around the world. And therefore, long story short, it's all related. I need to be careful of what food I'm putting in my body, but alcohol just couldn't be a part of it, because I wanted to be so clear in my brain and be ever present with my client, my one-on-one coaching clients and my consulting clients. And that lifts me up. I mean, talk about personal energy. I love to work now. I did not love showing up to a 9-to-5 role for 25 years in HR. And it was all about here. It was all about my mind and the thoughts that I was choosing. And it's just been such a huge shift. So talk about going all over the place. I just did the same thing, and it made sense in my brain. I don't know if it made sense to you at all, Jen, or to our listeners.
Completely made sense. Completely made sense. And I'm so proud of myself because I stayed present.
Okay. Exhibit A, Jen is a deep listener.
No, that comes and goes. That comes and goes. But I really did love that. And I think, gosh, it's so true that, you're talking about like that awareness that you had as you were leaving that 9-to-5 job, and like the deep knowing that I can do this. And, like, I think that is so something that so many people can resonate with. And then also like that true gut check of, this is not for me. And yes. I think like that, when we talk about like our energy and recognizing that stagnation and that sense of like apathy and, those types of things, when we pay attention to them, especially when they're consistently coming up, I think for you, it's just like this blaring light to basically say, this is not for you.
And I was there for 5 years. 5 years. And the whole time, I think what you hit on something really important. It's oftentimes that quiet voice. That's the one we want to listen to. You know what I mean?
The one that we're trying to step down. That one?
Yeah. The inner knowing. And somebody, not somebody, I often talk about this with clients. How do you know when, it truly is your inner knowing versus your amygdala and fight or flight?
Mm,
How do you know like the difference between the two? And
nice.
you ready for the answer that I heard and I now teach my client? I love this. You know it's your inner knowing when you're calm and you're not in a rush.
Mm, yeah.
What? Like mind blowing. And I think that applies to boundaries. If you feel like you want to shut the door and put a wall up, the way that a lot of people think about boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
that's fight or
Mm-hmm.
flight.
Mm,
That is fight or flight. When you take your time to say, this isn't working for me, what is my inner knowing telling me? And you're not in a rush to figure it out, then you're onto something. And if it feels like a boundary, if it feels like I have to do something for myself, that to me was a game changer in my life. And that's how I know when it's my inner knowing versus fight or flight. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree completely. And I think that's really tough for many of us to slow ourselves down long enough to be able to pay attention to that. And
Yeah.
I think that that's completely normal,
Yeah.
that so many of us are like, oh, yeah, that's, I get it, but I just don't have the time. And so we'll get to time management here in
I
a
know.
second.
I
But
was like,
no,
ooh.
really is absolutely. I think that's where it's at. And I
Yeah.
think for many of us, it's finding that intentionality to get to that point of listening and paying attention. And then most importantly, doing something about it. And
Yes. It's in the action.
yeah.
It's in the
So
intentional action. Yeah.
So let's get to then what was the number one of the survey, so prioritizing boundaries. And that number one was in self-care. So there
Yes.
was another study, I mean, study after study, but the Journal of Applied Psychology just had a study this last month, a couple months ago, that again reiterated that those who are intentional about self-care have lower instances of stress, lower instances of burnout, and are overall more fulfilled. And
Yep.
so it's like we hear it, we see it, we hear it
Yes.
again, and
Yes.
yet here we are. And it's number one. And with a bullet, really, it was 44%. The next one, which was personal energy, was 29%. So
Yeah.
it really matters to us. So I'd love to hear from you, Catherine. You always have such a great insight on this. So what are your thoughts about self-care?
I have yet to work. So my one-on-one coaching clients are HR women throughout the world. And I have yet to have a client who didn't want coaching on this. How do I make more time for myself? I know I need to do it, but how do I do it?
Mhm.
And one, my coaching is very customized. It's not cookie cutter. It's not like you go through this program and I coach everybody on the same thing, because every single woman is different. Their needs are different. And the one exception I have to that is there's a movie called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and it talks about how you start your day impacts your entire day. And are you doing some self-care in the morning to tee yourself up for the rest of the day? Um, and then, I get pushback from clients who are like, well, I'm not necessarily a morning person. The concepts can work throughout the day. It's all about figuring out what you need to do, experimenting with things that will give you energy, which ties back into what, number two that we were just talking about. So whether that's movement, whether that's ensuring you have proper fuel throughout the day when you're at your desk, whether that's putting your systems in place to time block for yoga in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, it could even be just, I actually worked with a client on this last week. She is always in back-to-back meetings. And it's just a matter of taking a look at her schedule, what can come off, and where can she add some personal self-care, which when we are so busy, it sounds counterintuitive. What do you mean you want me to put some self-care in my calendar? I don't have time for that. And oftentimes, when we put and develop those boundaries for our self-care, we do become more energized. It's not a taking away, it's a fueling, so to speak. So I think prioritizing self-care, there are ways to do it. And opposed to just sitting around saying, I know I need to do it, it's just experimenting with taking some action. And if it works for you, great, keep doing it. But if it doesn't work for you, be okay with pivoting. Be okay with pivoting. I had not planned on talking about that whatsoever. Tell me about prioritizing self-care for you.
Oh my gosh, prioritizing self-care has been something that I think now that I'm at the place that I'm at, I am incredibly fascinated when I learn about the perceptions of self-care with people I work with, because we live in a culture that has so indoctrinated us to have all of these expectations, especially when it comes to the workplace. So years ago, when I first got into HR, I had a manager who was a great individual. He was a great guy, but yet the messages that he sent around self-care, around, working all hours, he was one of those individuals. You talked about morning people. I'm a morning person, and I pride myself on it, but for many, many years, I judged myself for it. And it was during the time that I worked for this particular leader that I can now see that and recognize it for what it was. So during the time I was working for this leader, here was someone who was regularly sending emails 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and was back in the office at 7:30 in the morning. Work was his focus. Family was older. That was what was important to him. And so the messages he sent consciously and subconsciously were exactly that. And for someone like myself, who was early into my career, wanted to climb the ladder, right? Like, here we are as women wanting to be able to grow and be able to show ourselves and be able to prove ourselves, when we are working in environments that still was very much what was communicated, not only by what we say, but more importantly, by what we do. So that, I think, over quite a long period of time, really had me twisted in my brain around what it meant to take self-care. I had to make sure all was done, projects were done, deadlines were met, right? Like, I think that's the buildup that we get in our head beyond just not having enough time. It's typically because subconsciously that's exactly what everyone around us is telling us, right? And so that, I think, has been the greatest thing for me. Is, again, we kind of go back, but y'all, this is what this podcast is. It is about us, and it's about actually tuning in and recognizing that my ability to thrive and be successful has nothing to do with someone who sends an email at 10:30 at night, nothing to do with the other person who sends emails at 4 in the morning, nothing to do with that, right? But I think when we start building up these stories around what it is we think we should be, how we should, all of that starts to get very confusing when we as humans are built for that modeling and pulling from others. That's why, I'll say so often, you are, like it or not, we are who we surround ourselves around. So whether it's in our work environment, in our home environment, if we're around those people who are sending us messages subliminally or directly, those messages will be received. So that gets back to the energy. But really, when it comes to self-care, I think my story is like the evolution of myself over time is really to be able to gut check myself and have some damn compassion with that 25-year-old who didn't understand that, who really didn't understand that, and pushed herself to burnout, pushed herself to exhaustion because she thought that's what she needed to do. And I think at the end of the day, self-care, like you said, and I completely applaud it, is so personal and it's so individual. And you are the only one who's going to be able to know what that looks like for you. So all the listening of podcasts and all of the absorbing of information of what that looks like outside to other people, I think we have to be paying attention to that as well, because the more that we do that, sometimes then it comes to comparison and judgments around other people, and they're doing self-care right, and I'm doing it wrong, and like all of those things don't exist. So that's, for me, I think another long story, but I think really potent one is that defining what self-care is has to be a very personal and individual process.
Oh, yeah.
And once we get to that place where we can realize it, understand it, now it starts getting good. Now it can start getting good, because then you can start becoming super aware of what that can look like, and then find the way of being able, like the scales, right? To find a way to be able to balance that out, so that way you're still giving the best that you can.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And just that point of what you shared just makes me think about women specifically. And we are hardwired for that connection. All humans are, but women specifically. I mean, we just want to connect. And especially as HR professionals, we have a tendency to go into advisement and, almost telling people, hey, you should try this. You should try Ozempic. You should try this. Worked for me. And it comes from good intention. But just to echo and reiterate what you shared, it's always personal. You've got to figure out what self-care does look like for you. And just because somebody else over here, maybe they lost 50 pounds by doing a certain thing, sure, you can try that. But just remember, it needs to be for you. It's personal. It's personal. And then prioritizing it too, like you said. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's so funny, because here I am about to turn 50 this year, and I'm like, damn, it was that simple.
That's it's so mind-blowing, isn't it? It's like the narratives. I love that you said back when you were 25 years old, and I was the exact same way at 25. I was 4 years into my HR career. I worked for a health club, a one-stop shop for wellness and health, sports medicine, massage, workout, like all of that. So it was ever present in my life. And yet I felt as though I needed to push, I needed to work harder, I needed to work late hours. And that has a lot to do with imposter syndrome as well. But what I didn't realize was that prioritizing myself, as opposed to prioritizing the organization, working long hours, answering emails, like you were saying, at all hours of the night, to people please and meet other people's expectations, was burning myself out. And my one that I did my entire career was checking my email the minute I woke up in the morning. And if there was a quote unquote emergency, I would not do my morning workout. I would go right into the office. And as HR practitioners, how often do we think something's an emergency? That's not. So I would go in the office and override my self-care all the time. And thank God I went to coaching school and just really was able to apply some different logic and look at my narrative, and put new narratives in place, start experimenting with new thoughts that really did help me prioritize self-care in a whole new way.
I love that.
It's
love that. It is. And it, like, that gets into the last one we're going to talk about today, which is time management.
Oh boy.
So yeah, isn't that wild that, like, again, we kind of go back to, is it really that simple? Because time management is something that I think it's almost hilarious in a way of how easily we can convince ourselves that there's not enough time, that there's, never enough time for this and that. Like you had said, the skipping the workout before work because of the quote unquote emergency. I think I did that all the time. All the time. And that is, I think, very, very normal, especially, again, when we're really paying attention, those subconscious voices that are happening behind the scenes about wanting to succeed, about wanting to do well, around wanting, to please others, all of those things. If we're not checking in on those, if we're not aware of that stuff that's running behind the scenes, we will just power through.
Power through. Go, go, go.
That powering through without a gut check and without awareness, I think, is where you and I, over these last couple of years, it's almost like a screeching halt. It's like, whoa, whoa, wait a second. Hold the horse here. And I think the time management piece is that simple one that is like so easy to like start. You talk about like atomic habits and James Clear, and how do you start becoming more intentional around the things that are important to you, right? And that is, a lot of people think of habits and they're thinking of things you want to stop doing. I want to stop drinking. I want to stop eating so much. I want to da, 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 da. And, to shift our mindset around what habits actually can be, I think
Yes.
is such a massive thing. And when it comes to time management, that's the one that actually, like, when we start becoming more intentional around, things that we actually want in our lives to add
Yes.
to our lives, right? When we start doing that, time management becomes more playful. You can have more fun with actually what your day can be, instead of it being so like overly
Yes.
structured and so overly like overwhelming.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think it's truly a gift to be able to start becoming more aware in our own lives personally, that you and I have done through coaching and through continued. It's not just a one and done. It's like
It's not.
continued. Every week we're going back into it. We're checking some of these beliefs that are faulty, and these things that like do not serve us. And when it comes to time and how much time we have and how much time we think we don't have and what we think we should do, that is absolutely one of those things that I know for myself. And I think I'm guessing from your head nod, we check in on that every single week. I mean, more than that, but all the time. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Is it real? Is that real? Or is that something I'm just telling myself because I think I need, I think I should be this or should do that. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
think it's massive shift, but it's something that I think is so worth it. So
Absolutely.
worth
Yeah.
it.
It's I'm flashing back to, I can't even remember the name of the class that I led. It was for women on January 1st. I wanted to start January 1st off surrounded by women who wanted to, and this may sound a little cheesy, but wanted to make sure 2024 was their best year yet. And
Oh,
yeah, it was so fun.
easy, but I love it.
It was so fun. There were so many HR women on the call. It was just so a little bit self-serving for me. I knew I needed to start my year off surrounded by women who are taking the power back, so to speak, and are moving forward with intentionality and just really putting those systems into place. And going back to what you were saying, our brains are hardwired for that negativity bias of what we can't do, what we shouldn't do. I was in church with my mom yesterday. I grew up very Catholic, and Lent is all about giving something up. Give it
Mm,
up, give it up. You're bad. I mean, that's my interpretation. That was my personal experience. That was my narrative I told myself. Give something up because it's bad. But what I didn't learn through church, but I learned in coaching school, and that was so present with me yesterday in Mass, was, well, what do I want? Well, how do I want to spend my time? During
yeah.
Lent, for traditional Catholics, it's what do I want to be experiencing? And as opposed to, I want to give up alcohol. No, I just want to experience more clarity. I want to be ever present with my family. I want to feel great every single morning when I wake up. So for
Mm,
me, it's going back to coaching school. It's that shift toward what do we want to sort of
mhm,
negate what our brain naturally does with that negativity bias of just swirling in those thoughts and those experiences that don't serve us, that lead us to thinking, I need boundaries, I need boundaries, I need boundaries. Where the actual shift that shifts us out of that state of, I need these boundaries is, how do I want to be spending my time? Figuring out what's most important to us in the year of 2024 for this upcoming week, for this day, and really putting our systems in place to stay laser focused on what does serve us, what we do want to be working on, what's going to move the needle most for us at work, whether we're in the 9 to 5 realm, whether we're a coach, whatever that looks like, whether you're an entrepreneur, who knows, but really being intentional with our time. And if we're honest with ourselves, are we wasting time? As you so eloquently put in the beginning of the podcast, I just coached a client last week. I was like, okay, just walk me through your day. She's got 2 little kiddos. We can all relate to like when you have littles, how little time you feel that you have. And what we realized what she was doing, she would drop her daughter off at school. She would go back home, kind of just do some stuff around the house, then go into work nonstop through lunch, go pick her daughter up at daycare, go home, start doing dinner, all of those things. And then she would get into bed and she would scroll. And I was like, okay, how much are you scrolling? She's like, 2 or 3 hours. And she was very honest with herself. And once she was able to sort of step back into that observer role, take a look at how she was spending her time. And by the way, that was a couple of weeks ago. We just did a coaching session. It was last week when I got back from vacation, and she's like, I no longer am dropping my daughter off and going home. I drop my daughter off and I go right to work, and I have so much more energy. Mm-hmm. I'm more relaxed. There's nobody there that early. So for some of us, that wouldn't work, but that's what works for her. And as opposed to doing all the scrolling at night, she's now journaling. She wanted to try some journaling. So it's just about experimenting. It's about trying new things. And it's about getting honest with ourselves that we all have 24 hours in a day. And if you work for 8 and you sleep for 8, you have 8 hours. And when you do some simple math to say, how am I spending that 8 hours? And you're really honest with yourself, that's where it's boundaries for yourself, really. It's for you. As we talked about, it's not against anybody else. It's for you. Yeah. Boy, did I go off on a tangent again.
No, that was such a good, the story that you shared is, I think, relatable for so many of us. I know for me, for sure, is like, I had a coach about 1.5 years ago really push me to do a journaling of paying attention to my time, right? Like really tracking my time. And so, she was like, okay, the next session, we are going to go through it, and you're probably not going to enjoy it. And I, didn't, but it was very eye-opening and helped me become more aware around where I was wasting time, where I was just putting myself to quote unquote, relax, but really, it was taking away from times that I really needed. And I think that self-awareness really was so huge for me. So, oh my gosh. Well, let's see. I think we've gotten through the survey. Was there anything else that we missed?
I don't think so. I think just being mindful, it always comes back to our narratives, which is so interesting. The stories that we tell ourselves. And is it factual, or is it, mind drama? Is it something that we've told ourselves for so long that we think is actually true? Or is it truly factual? And I think, that's one thing to just really pay attention to is, is your narrative working for you or not? Are you putting these boundaries up because you're really frustrated and you're not being honest with yourself about what you can be doing to be empowered, to be kind to yourself, to be kind to others, to be compassionate? Obviously 45 minutes is not enough for us to talk about boundaries. I'm so excited to, in HR Empower Hour tomorrow to kind of continue the discussion of the why it's so important, but then to get into the how and to talk about systems to actually help people develop healthy boundaries with this whole new definition of what a boundary is to keep people in versus keeping them out, and leading with that shame, leading with that judgment, because that doesn't work. That doesn't work. I'll give you just one more quick, I just have another quick example. in my one-on-one coaching practice, most people pay up front. Sometimes people pay throughout the year. My course is a year long. And I actually had a client who said, I'd like to pay on a quarterly basis. And I was like, sure, no problem. Right. So what I found myself doing, she's been delinquent on her payment for about 4 months now. And I can't get a hold of her. My coaching is very front heavy. I do one-on-one, just all this stuff in the very first 3 months. And then the last 9 months is monthly group coaching. So we finished the one-on-one. She got a lot of value out of it. Her confidence skyrocket, all of these things. And then it's been radio silence. And she hasn't honored her word on payment. And where my mind started going was, well, you need to honor your word. You need to honor your commitment. And I need to put up this boundary of, you need to complete that payment. And again, it's so funny. As I'm sitting in church with my mom yesterday, listening to the priest, I was like, that thought is not working for you. You are not figuring out where she's coming from, what's going on. You haven't taken the time to say what's happening and what can we be doing so that you can honor your word and complete your payment, as opposed to please get this paid. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that boundary of I need to get paid and making her wrong in my own brain of she hasn't paid, that's not right. And putting this boundary up of like, you need to pay in a certain time, that stuff just doesn't work. I think about invoices we send out in HR, and when, our vendors, when we're in HR, our vendors are delinquent on payment. And we go through this like, well, this is a boundary. You need to pay on time. And when we create this divisiveness, when a boundary is divisive and it keeps people out, it puts them in a box, it doesn't work. We don't ultimately yield what we do want. And oftentimes our brains just don't go to, okay, what do we want? And how do we keep that person in, so to speak? So it's really interesting. I mean, I just literally sat in church. My mind was like being blown right and left. I promise I was listening to the priest too, but it was crazy. It was crazy. So yeah, I mean, boundaries, like you were saying, it's just this evolution. It's a constant evolution of how we define it. How are we using the term to be helpful and not hurtful?
Oh my gosh, that's so good. That's so good, because I think, that inclusivity, right? The idea of being able to say, hey, I know deep down what it is I need, right? Or what is needed. And how can I also be inclusive to this other individual and to this circumstance so that I can still be able to come from a place of love or come from a place of good intentions. And, so I think that's such a good way to end this, because like, if we really think about it, that's what it is like having the courage within ourselves to be truly radically honest, right? Truly radically like true to ourselves about what it is we know is needed, and then be able to like present it and put it out into the world, or put it out towards that other person in a respectful, loving, and yet still intentional way. Right. Bingo. I think that is such a great way for me anyway. As I was listening to you, I'm like, nailed it. So that's what I, for myself, just summarized it all up I loved it, Catherine. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Like, minds are being blown, or at least our minds are being blown. And I love it. And I love starting Mondays off with you. So powerful. I hope it's so powerful for our listeners. And I'm just looking forward to doing it again next week with you. So fun.
Same. Well, okay. So with that, everybody, we are going to go ahead and wrap up, and want to thank you all for joining. And don't forget, every day is a new opportunity to thrive and shine in HR. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, Jen. Have a good week, everyone.